What you can learn about depressions. And I'm not just talking about the Great Depression. I'm actually talking right now about the, one second, let me get around this guy. About the Great Panic of 1893. It's the Depression of the 1890s. Such a wonderful book I'm reading by this guy named Charles Hoffman. And it's an older book. I think he'd written this in 70, no, I think it's 57 or something like that, 1957. And I just love older books because they tell you what it was going on at that time. Anyway, very interesting. So what was happening back then? Something happened in Britain, a banker, I think it was a big bank, I want to say Baring Bank or something like that went kaput. I can't remember why, but I'm sure it's over leveraged. And the economic, Europe was going into depression back then, the beginning of the 1890s. And it hadn't hit our shores yet, but there was a significant outflow of gold reserves in the United States. Because what happens every single time, what happens is liquidity always reigns supreme. This is why I say you have to have liquidity. You must have liquidity. But my liquid cash isn't doing anything. When all things go to naught, the people with liquidity, be it cash, combination of gold coins, silver coins, you gotta have liquidity, man. I just, every single time it's the same story. There's a lack of liquidity, especially if you're not even heavily leveraged, if you're just leveraged. So we see what happened in America. What happened was, for the first time ever, we had our gold reserves drop below 100 million. Yeah, 100 million, I think is what it was. And anyway, so people started getting kind of nervous. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, because of massive expansion of railroads, the Pennsylvania Reading Railroad, if memory serves, that went kaput in 1893. That led to a lot of concern, but people seem to be kind of taking a stride. Again, people were starting to trade in their cash for gold, though, because remember, we had a gold standard back then. They had something called the Sherman Silver Act of 1890. I'm not all that familiar with what that was, but that started to challenge people about the gold standard. Are we going to get off the gold standard? Because a lot of people said the gold standard is making money too tight, and is making rich people, essentially the richer get richer, and the poor, making the industrialists get richer, and the poor people in the Midwest and whatnot, the farmers and not, they wanted to have more fluid currency to inflate things, because back then we were having massive deflation. Anyway, so what happened was you had the Reading and the Pennsylvania Reading Railroad go kaput. Then you had the Pennsylvania Steel Company go kaput. Pennsylvania Steel Company wasn't huge, but it was big enough to really start getting people nervous. So there started becoming a run on the banks. A run being what? Well, they traded in their cash for gold. Now, all these Midwestern and Southern banks were going kaput left and right. And as such, the Eastern banks were doing fine. Eastern banks were doing fine until the contagion spilled over, when these Midwestern, Western, and Southern banks started saying, man, we need liquidity. We're going to start turning your money, essentially, for your gold reserves, because we need this too to basically keep our bank afloat. It's always the same thing. The people with money did fine. The people with debt who didn't have liquidity got smoked every single time. I cannot stress this enough. If you were leveraged and you needed liquidity and you couldn't get liquidity because everybody else needed liquidity too, you were SOL. We learned this in the Great Depression, the exact same, the monetary contraction, the exact same thing happened. We learned it in Japan, contraction of the monetary supply. We learned it in the Great Financial Crisis. We had no recession in 2007, 6, 7, 8. People had no liquidity. The people with liquid cash survived. The people without did not. It's just that simple, man. It's amazing too. People say the gold standard is the cast me out. It just isn't, dude. It isn't. The gold standard did not work during the financial crisis of the 1890s. It just did not. And if you actually read some writings on this stuff, you'll learn very quickly that a lot of people did not like the gold standard because, like I said before, it kept them from having inflated dollars, which allowed what they would thought their ability to make prices go up. And we saw a massive decline in the commodity prices in the 1890s. We saw massive decline in prices across the board. And I know it sounds good, declining prices. It's not. Declining the prices, especially when you're leveraged, you cannot think of a worse way to be is to have debt during declining prices. If you're leveraged and you have a hard time finding liquidity, and all of a sudden the prices for your goods that you're producing goes down, you're in a world of hurt, dude. There's no two ways around that. And that's exactly, and that depression of the 1890s was huge. Oh, but the gold standard would resolve it. It didn't. We were on the gold standard. And again, people were trading their freaking, so the banks started issuing these certificates, not backed by gold, but backed by high quality collateral. Whatever the high quality collateral was, what, you know, a railroad company stock, that wasn't very high quality. So people start buying the gold, gold certificates, the certificates for collateral issued by the bank. But that did not solve the crisis, because it wasn't backed by gold. It was just backed by collateral, with just like during the great financial recession of 2007 and 8, where that collateral was only as good as it was that there was a buyer to buy that collateral. The minute the buyer disappears because of contraction of monetary supply, guess what? That collateral ain't worth crap. It's exactly what happened. It's mark-to-market accounting on steroids. Exactly what happened in the Great Recession. Anyway, again, the point being is the people who had the money are the people who survived. The people who were leveraged, the people who did not have liquidity, they did not survive in terms of their financial situation. And it's very interesting stuff. All right, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you know a little bit more about the Sherman-Silver Act. Maybe you know a little bit more about the contagion that spread from Europe over here. Oh, by the way, we had massive tariffs, McKinley tariff, Dingley tariff in the 1890s, and that did not stem the deflation that happened. Kind of weird, isn't it? Yes, it is. All right, God bless.